I'm recording this a few days from the 2024 US election, and you know what? I've decided that the time is ripe for a list of the best dystopian science fiction movies. My name is Christian Malte. I have seen so far 1,083 science fiction movies. And yes, for some reason, I thought the theme might be appropriate. And it's not just the US election. I mean, like, how are things going? And if you're watching me from the future, nevertheless, I am optimistic for the future. I will say this, but maybe I'll mention it further along. But for now, what better way to keep our sanity through these terrible dystopian times than with a list of the 7 best dystopian science fiction movies. Number 7, it's Dredd. Dredd, the 2012 adaptation of the 2000 AD comic book. It's so good. I mean, if you've seen it, and you've probably seen it, this is such the perfect comic book adaptation. Probably, it's quite likely one of the best, maybe even the best comic book adaptation I've ever seen. It's like up there with Superman 1 and Spider-Man 2, essentially. So the world of Judge Dredd is the urban spring city of doom dystopia, essentially. It's like the Margaret Thatcher dystopia. So the idea is that we have these massive cities, or basically like continent size, and everything is falling apart. The technology is falling apart, society is falling apart, but we still have the rule of law. And to maintain the rule of law, we have the judges, and they are judge, jury, and executioner, and they have these super cool bikes and these super powerful AI guns, and they go around and they kill everyone who disobeys the law, but even in like the slightest way, like jaywalking is like a criminal offense, essentially. And there is no judge more legendary than Judge Dredd. And as you probably well know, there was a Sylvester Stallone movie a few years earlier, I think from '95. And while it's not good, it does have some really cool stuff, in fact, in it. I mean, it's a disappointment for a Dredd fan, but it has Max von Sydow, and the costumes are cool and so forth. But really, it doesn't compare to Dredd, because it captures perfectly the feeling of both. Like, Dredd is a very difficult line to walk, because it's anarchic and it's fascistic and it's serious, but it's a joke at the same time. It's a send-up. It both puts forth Dredd as a good guy, maybe to be admired, but at the same time he's a monster. He's not a good guy at all. Certainly in like the first issues, he's not like, the judges are clearly not a good solution to the problem. It's the one they have chosen in that universe, but the Dredd universe is basically telling you that it's like fascism is not the solution. But again, there is a form of like stoic, a man's got to do what a man's got to do quality about Judge Dredd, and he's played here by Karl Urban. And if ever there is a Nobel Prize for cool actors, well, Mr. Urban, in my book, you're first in line. You're top of the line. Like maybe Jeffrey Combs, maybe Ian McKellen, but at the risk of sacrilege, you're pretty much number one, like, if only for Dr. McCoy. But Dr. McCoy, Lord of the Rings, and this Judge Dredd, and Karl Urban captures Judge Dredd so perfectly. Like this sense of being like a complete jerk, like an obtuse jerk, but at the same time, he has something charismatic and something appealing, and he is a man of integrity. It's a very fine line to walk, and Carl Urban does all that only with his chin, basically. He's acting with this part of his face, kind of like Peter Weller in RoboCop. So it's a hard thing to pull off, and it does pull it off magnificently, and the whole movie captures the feeling of the comic books so well. And final thing I'll say about the movie is that one of the big strengths of the movie is its narrative simplicity. So it's a like Game of Death, I think, the Bruce Lee movie. I haven't seen that one, but the idea is that there is a Judge Dredd is called with his partner. He's called to this building, and there's an evil crime lord at the top of the building, and he's at the bottom of the building, and he has to climb up to the top to fight the boss. It's just like a video game, and it works so amazingly well. I mean, there is no end in sight of the good things we can say about this movie. It's a joy, and it's a hyper violent joy. I mean, I do think it's a bit on the edge of being too violent, but even that is in the tone of the comic book. So Dredd is a joy and a wonder, and it's wonderful, and it's our number 7. Number 6 is Delicatessen. So this is a movie that is very well known in French culture, French circles, but probably less well known in the English world. And it's by Genet et Caro. So Delicatessen is like it's environmental collapse dystopia. It's a future where we don't know what happened, but everything is polluted and nothing grows, kind of like Blade Runner 2049, that kind of thing. And but essentially everything happens in like this building or this small town, and there's a new guy who arrives in town. But first of all, everybody is super eccentric. Like 100% of the characters in this movie are like comic books come to life once again, but like more like they're like Ted Avery cartoons, but with real actors. And the movie has this cartoon-like quality, and it's both like a horror movie, but a very lightweight, surrealistic horror movie. It's horrific, but it's funny at the same time, because there's nothing to eat, but there's a butcher in town. And let's just say that the eye, with the very eager eye, the new arrival, like the butcher's stand is empty, but might not be empty for very long by the way they look at the guy, at the new guy. But so it has that horrific quality, but it's so like Genet et Caro. Okay. Jean-Pierre Genet et Caro did this movie, then they did City of Lost Children. They did, I think, a few short films before, but yeah, their two main feature films are this one and City of Lost Children, and they became living legends for a while. Like their names were like when I was in high school, essentially, they were very. They had that aura like Kubrick or Tarantino. Like they were household names, more or less, certainly among fans. Like they were the highest of the high. And so much so that Hollywood came a-calling, and the pair split up. And I don't think, I might be wrong about this, but I don't think they worked together ever again. But Genet essentially went to Hollywood. He did Alien 4. For better or for worse, and there was some opinion. The general consensus is that Alien 4 does not work and is not. It has good things and it has bad things in it, like the monster at the end. I don't think it works very well, but there are elements in that. What Genet tried to do is bring that aesthetic from his first two movies with Caro to the Alien world. And the cool parts of Alien 4, we have that, you know, 20-fold in the, certainly in Delicatessen. And afterwards, Jeunet did Amélie Poulain, which was very, very like huge for a while. And the thing is that Delicatessen is essentially, it's very much like a kind of Amélie Poulain, except it's a future dystopia with cannibals. So definitely worth it. It's like, it's worth, if you haven't seen it, it's worth it. It's beautiful, it's funny, it's super well directed. I mean, it's brilliant from beginning to end. It's a real joy, so very worth your while. Number 5 is Escape from New York. So there's this idea, you know, when you watch movies from the 80s, there were a lot of Mad Max ripoffs, and we like in Italian movies, and I realized eventually that they're not really Mad Max ripoffs. They're at the same time they're at least as much Escape from New York ripoffs as Mad Max ripoffs. And why am I mentioning this? Because I think we underestimate just how seminal, just how groundbreaking and revolutionary a film Escape from New York was. So it kind of feels in many ways like an extension of The Warriors, you know, the gang movies, the gang movie, I think by Walter Hill, but it's 100% a Carpenter movie. It's pretty much the film where Carpenter really starts nailing the Carpenter aesthetic and the Carpenter feel, you know, with the 2:35 aspect ratio movies. He had that before, like in Halloween, obviously, and Dark Star, it's a good film, but a little bit less. Assault on Precinct 13, it's very good, but he was still starting out. So you can tell that he's beginning, even though all the elements of Carpenter are kind of there already in Assault on Precinct 13. And The Fog was cool, but you know, he's still kind of finding his legs. But Escape from New York, Carpenter has arrived, and so the basic story is, it's kind of an extension of this narrative that was very popular in the very widespread in the 70s and early 80s, which is kind of like the Reagan narrative, which is that we're losing control of the cities because of crime, especially in New York. And the very famous premise, obviously, of Escape from New York is that it's gotten so bad that New York, the island, has been sealed off, and it's all criminals now. So we have police stations with, you know, machine guns all around, with helicopters flying over, and you know, and you have, there's the bridge, but it's full of mines. So there is no way to get out of New York once you're in, and the only people who do get in normally are criminals. It's like a high security prison, the highest security, and but once you're in, there's no escape. But in the city of New York, the criminals rule. They do whatever they want. So you have gang lords and all these things, kind of semi-surreal gang lords, you know, whatever. So certainly there's a kind of surreal vibe in the city. But what happens obviously is that the President of the United States, played by Donald Pleasance, he's flying over New York on his way to a peace talk with the Soviets, I think, probably, and he's trying to avert World War III. And he has a cassette tape that he needs to bring. It's very important that he brings this cassette tape. Except that terrorists hijack the plane, and the plane goes down, and he is essentially parachuted in this like egg thing, whatever. He's parachuted in New York with the MacGuffin, the tape that he needs to bring back to save the Earth. And so the president is in this city, and there's no way normally there is no way to get him out. So who they call? Snake Plissken. Like if Carl Urban is the coolest actor on earth, Snake Plissken, he's at that level of being cool. He's like the quintessential anti-hero, and he's a former soldier, but he was put in jail for a bank heist that turned out wrong. So whatever. So they sent him on a mission. He has 1 week to get the president, or 3 days, whatever. And to make sure that he doesn't escape, they put a time bomb in his head, in his neck. So if he doesn't get the president back in 3 days, his head will explode. So they drop him in New York City, and he has to go through the city and have all these extravagant fights in this, dystopic wasteland of urban criminal decay, of madness, and gangs fighting, and people fighting with baseball bats or with a barbed wire, like an ECW pay-per-view. So he has all these crazy adventures, and at the end, I mean, it's aged a little in the sense that this is Carpenter saying that when Escape from New York came out in 1981, the experience of watching it, people described it as a non-stop, hyper-violent roller coaster. But when you watch it now, it's like a very leisurely drive, in the countryside. Those 40 minutes of burning rats, whatever. So but it has lost some of its shock effect, okay, but it hasn't lost, I think, its power and potency and relevancy. And the key thing is that at the end, well, I'll spoil it for you if you haven't seen it, but Snake Plissken, the good guys win, okay, so he succeeds in his mission, but we discover at that time that the president is not a good guy, essentially. He's a heartless politician and so forth. And this is really what makes the movie not only dystopian, but kind of revolutionary in a sense, because it's putting forth, in one sense, like the what might feel in what some people would think is a reactionary, discourse, but it's saying that there might be urban decay, but the people who are condemning it are not in good faith, essentially. And essentially, no matter what side you pick in the political debate, is the core point, somebody is using you, okay? No one cares about you, okay? So it's all kind of a game, a rigged system, something like that. There's an element of that, and which is very, very Carpenter. It's always there, like the anti-hero against, the big machine and so forth, like Nada in They Live. And so so Snake Plissken really is a good expression of our sense of inner, revolt, but also decency. He's a crook. He's a terrible guy, but he does stand for a form of integrity in this collapsing dystopian world. And he's our hero for number 5. Number 4 is a much more obscure movie, but it's one of my favorites. It's called The Big Mess, Der Grosse Verhau. It's a German film from 1971 by a guy named Alexander Kluge, I think. He's a big name in German underground movies. So if you're not into German underground movies, you might be hearing me say this and you might be anxious for me to skip the next film, but that The Big Mess, Der Grosse Verhau, is such a cool film. It's funny. It has no budget. It's like beyond the shoestring budget. It's like it's cheap beyond measure, but it's also smart and funny beyond measure. It's really hyper subversive, but in a non-preachy way. So essentially, this is the dystopia of hyper capitalism. Essentially, we're in the future, and there is we have, like, kind of colonized the solar system, and there is one big company that rules the galaxy. This is a very frequent theme in science fiction. You've probably seen it tons of time, and but so there's this one company, and but we also have all these pirate ships, which are essentially piloted by like space, venture capitalist, but like it's the future equivalent of betting on the stock market. It has kind of that feel, because so you have these massive spaceships that are fighting each other, but they are hyper clumsy. They look terrible. They look like, they are the least elegant spaceships you will ever see. And inside of those spaceships, one of the pirates, for instance, is a couple, an elderly couple, and they have arranged the tiny space they can occupy in this mile-long, spaceship. Like, it's huge. It's like an entire city block, the spaceship. But the machinery is so immense that you can only crawl around in those air vents, essentially on all fours, and you can occupy tiny rooms, and so you spend 6 months in your tiny room. And here, for instance, you have this little old lady. I don't remember if her husband is there also, but a charming old grandma in her massive spaceship, and she's offering cookies to I forget who she's talking to, and tea and crumpets and whatever. But she's a space pirate. Like, we're about to destroy this spaceship and like kill everyone. And she's talking about, we have to go for profit. We're going to have a bigger margin in 3 months. Our scale, the profits are rising. So she's talking like those financial advisors, so-called, on the news, who are telling, the graph is looking great, and buy this and sell that and mortgage your house for a 4th time. So she's kind of like that, and it's hyper. It's kind of joyful, but she's like this super hyper cynical capitalist and this charming grandma, and she's just one of the characters, and the entire film is like that. It has that tone, and the idea is that it's one of the other movies on this list. The one that is coming up has kind of that quality, which I'm about to tell you, which is just how dystopic our normal life actually is, because she's kind of saying things we've heard a million times, and it's so it's the dystopia of hyper capitalistic normalcy, and this discourse of super competition, and but essentially it's like a super trippy, funny, obscure German movie where there's a rock star, like a krautrock band, like experimental, somewhat famous German rock band called Amon Dul Du, who were, I think, a group of this anarchist commune who had a rock band, whatever. They're in it. They play music in it, and there are sequels which I haven't seen, which look really cool. But in terms of, and I'm guessing the sequel have that feel, but excluding the other movies by the same guy in the same universe, there is no other movie on Earth like The Big Mess, the Grosse Verhau. It's hard to find a copy. There was a DVD out there for a while, but it is entirely worth it to find a copy. When I saw it, I had been looking for a copy for like literally decades, probably at least 30 years. And when I watched it, it was even better than my 10-year-old self could have expected after a 30-year wait. It's that good. That's our number 3. Number 2 is, that one is very well known, it's Metropolis. Metropolis from 1927. And I did hesitate about putting it in the list because part of, like, and I'll say why in a moment. But the fact is that in a list of famous science fiction or best science fiction dystopias, you can't not put, you have to put Metropolis in there. It's such a legendary film, and I'm not sure if it's a groundbreaking film, but it is an achievement in cinema and in particular of the cinema of the silent age. And it's at the end of the silent movies, but it's like at the peak of the cinematic art of cinema before sound, essentially. It's so everybody knows it. It's in the future, and we have capitalists who are living, like in the clouds in their buildings. Once again, these themes have been seen in many other movies and books. But yeah, so you have the capitalists living in the clouds, and they're rich, and they have this life of leisure and pleasure. And you have the working drones at the basement, of the city, who are living a life of utter horror and dehumanization and alienation and all these things. We've all seen like the famous, images of, the people walking in line, with their head down, and and the fact is that it's a Fritz Lang movie, and the reason why it's so powerful as a movie is that it's a master director. So Fritz Lang, again, he is a legendary director. His name is very well known, but it's until you have to, when you actually sit down to watch his movies, it's only then that you realize just how absolutely brilliant, what a master of filmmaking Fritz Lang was. Like, he's at Stanley Kubrick and Tarkovsky levels. He's at that level of cinematic mastery, of filmmaking mastery. And in this case here, he had a massive budget, and I think the movie lost money, so I don't know if he bankrupted the studio, but because I don't think the movie was very successful. I might be wrong about that, but the fact is that they spent a gazillion Deutschmarks or whatever. It's a huge production, and it was all put on the screen. So you have these immense, futuristic sets which look like a gazillion Deutschmarks. They look amazing, and so, and you have high production value. Everything is beautiful, everything is massive, it's super creative, it's super brilliant, like the machines and so forth, like the guy in the clock, who's turning the needles in the clock, and all these things. But what we're seeing here, what is interesting, is that it's what is the dystopia that is being presented, and it's the reason why I love the visuals of the movie. I love the imagination of the movie. I love Rudolf Kleinhoge, who plays the mad scientist. He's great, and the robot Maria and so forth. She's great, and the visuals. There's tons of cool stuff. But I've always felt kind of awkward about the movie because it's a pre-fascist movie for real. This is actual pre-fascist cinema, and the thing is, it's uncanny how it's not what you would expect it to be. But why am I saying this? So first of all, it was written by Thea von Harbou, who was at that point in time Fritz Lang's wife, I think, and she was previously married to the guy who played the mad scientist, Rudolf Kleinhoge. But and she's she's famous in she became a Nazi eventually. Okay. And like and I think in the Phil Hardy Encyclopedia, I think he called her an ardent Nazi, but there are a lot of questions there, and this is part of the awkwardness of the what this movie asks, the questions it asks for us today. You know, because okay, so why is it fascist? Because there's the evil capitalist, okay, who is not in himself evil, but he is exploiting the masses, but he's not doing it purely for evil purposes. It's just that capitalism left to itself will exploit the masses, essentially. He's smart, he's ruling the economy, you know, as he should, because he's a smart capitalist and the boss of the company, but he's kind of heartless. And at the bottom, we have all these workers, and obviously, as I mentioned, they have horrible drone-like lives. And in the evenings, okay, they go see this wonderful woman called Maria, who is talking about, oh yes, you have horrible lives, but do not feel hatred. You know, hatred is bad. We should feel love. We should all work together, kind of. And she's essentially preaching, like prophetizing about this future world where workers and capital will work together in harmony. But she's definitely not preaching any form either of revolution or social change. That's not what she's preaching. And we know that because I haven't seen it in like ages, but essentially I think the boss hires the mad scientist because he hears about that and he's afraid that the workers will revolt or, you know, will walk out of the limit. Like he's afraid he will lose control of the workers. So he goes to see this mad scientist, and the mad scientist creates a robot version of Maria, and I had this Freudian slip about virgin because it's a core thing. It's a massively important aspect of the script, because Maria is the good, like the human version. She is the virgin. She's sexless. She is good as she is the expression of good, and good here is. There is no sexuality, there is no sexual drive, and there is no revolt, and there is none of that. There is none of that going on. You still have your job, you still work at your job, but now something, the heart. Okay? And when she becomes the robot, she entices the workers through again, going from memory, but she's hyper lascivious, like she's very sexy. She makes the sexy dance, and this excites the workers, and her former followers are scandalized that she would become so immoral, like because sex is bad. Yes. But she excites the workers, and she uses this sexual energy, you know, to make the workers revolt because they have become mindless brutes. And they destroy the city, and it's all horrible. And but at the end, okay. So up to now we have seen both sides of two kinds of dystopias. Really, we have seen the dystopia of capitalist, you know, exploitation and abuse and heartlessness, you know, that part. But we've also kind of seen the dystopia of the pre-1984 dystopia, like the communist dystopia, like communism itself as dystopia. The workers are rising up, and it's horrible, and you know they might even put in place a dictatorship of the proletariat, because this is a few years after the Russian Revolution. Yes, it's basically 10 years after the revolution. So that's very much in the minds of people at the period. So certainly worker revolt is bad, and worker control of anything is bad because they're mindless sexual brutes. Yes, this is how you control them. So, but there is, thankfully a solution at the end, which is that the good human Maria is liberated. And again, I'm spoiling the end. But she's the one who unites the workers and the boss. Yes, and she says that I do remember very well. I said, the boss is the head, and the workers are the hand, but we need the heart. And it's her, of course. And we need a mediator, and that's the conclusion of Metropolis. We need a mediator. And so she's there in the middle, and they hold hands, and that's it. And so even when I was like 10 or 15, I thought that was like really tacky. It felt like didn't work. But what do we have here? So the idea is that we have capitalists, but they can't rule because it doesn't work. And we have workers, and they definitely can't rule because they're just the hands. They have no mind. They're brutes. They're, And so in the middle, you have a Christ-like figure who unites capital and workers. So we're in the Germany of the 1920s. Who could fit that bill? A Christ-like figure who will unite the people. But here's the thing, and this is the really troubling part. And after that, a few honorable mentions and our number one. But here's the thing is that I checked just before making this video just how ardent a Nazi Tia von Haubau was. And it's hard to tell because, apparently she said that she only became a member of the party because she wanted to save the lives of Indian immigrants. And she had a lover, an Indian lover, while she was married to Fritz Lang. It's shortly before he left, and there's a whole story there. But the I don't care about that. I mean, I don't care who people sleep with. But here, the issue is that, okay, she said that she joined the Nazi party because of to help some immigrants, but everybody after the war, when you have a totalitarian regime and people collaborate, well, after the war, once all the leaders have been killed, like they have been hanged or shot or whatever, well, all those people who joined the party when it was in power, they usually have a story like that, and so that is not enough to say if it's true or not true. But why do they join the party? Because it's a totalitarian regime. So you either join the party or die, or at least don't do anything. You have to be in the party to have a career. And she did direct a few, like 2 movies. So there's self-interest. There might be some altruistic reasons. I mean, maybe she did want to save those Indian immigrants. Maybe. And the fact is that a totalitarian regime always puts everybody in it in those types of moral quandaries where you're participating in something horrible, and you will be punished if you don't, but you will get some benefits if you collaborate. It's always the carrot and the stick. And it's not that different from any other regime. But the thing, and I'll finish, this is my final thing for Metropolis, is that on Wikipedia, I saw a quote from the set designer, the production designer, the guy who built those incredibly fantastic sets of the Metropolis in the movie. And I'll quote it. He said she was not only, he's talking about von Haubau, who wrote the script, which is, again, it's pretty proto-fascist in many ways. But he said, Eric Kettelhut is his name, she was not only well-liked, by her colleagues, but also as much a creative force, as highly motivated and smoothly efficient as her husband, so Fritz Lang. Her loving personality was crucial to the professional teamwork. Von Harbau's ability to reach out to people and find compromise in the worst situations was a vital resource. So, and apparently, like Fritz Lang, I have seen sometimes that Fritz Lang wasn't always very cool to deal with on his film sets. But what's spectacular here? What's fantastic? Like, what's striking here? Well, Von Harbau, who wrote the script, is this loving figure who finds compromise in the hardest, settings, in the most difficult situation. Well, clearly, it's the same. It's Maria from the movie. It's like she's almost like this Mary Sue character. Like if you read it like that, it's almost like she's writing about herself. Like she's Maria in the movie. So here's this loving person, according to this to Kettelhut, the production designer, and she's looking for compromise out of love, and she joins the Nazi party, where she sees this guy who she seems to think will unite, the people and the workers and the bosses and be this mediator. So how messed up is that, So it's, evidently there's no justification on earth for that, let us say, that level of blindness. But at the same time, is this not a fascinating case study? And is this not infinitely more complex and nuanced and closer to real life than just calling people, racist or fascist or whatever, and just not seeing the complexity of the person? Okay, even if they are blind, or like it's. So there's a lot to go in that direction, but certainly Metropolis it's certainly like a fantastic. It's a dystopian masterpiece, but for all those fascist things or that simplistic narrative, at best it's simplistic. Yeah, the story is not so good, but the visuals are masterful, and Fritz Lang is masterful. So what is my number one? Well, before I will mention a few honorable mentions. First of all, I have included you might have noticed that I included no movies from Eastern Europe, and there are many certainly Soviet dystopias, but also in Poland, like the Piotr Shulkin movies. And there is enough to make a different list. So basically, that's what I'm going to do. 7 movies is not a lot. It's a short list. So I will make a separate list just for East European dystopias. Eventually, I'll do it. Eventually, but there are plenty of other good dystopias I could have mentioned. I could have mentioned any of the versions of 1984. There's the one from 1984 with John Hurt and Richard Burton, which is really it's a great movie. It's a great adaptation of the book. Visually, it's incredible. John Hurt, always one of my favorite actors. But there's a version with Peter Cushing from the 50s, I think. Which was anyway. There are 2 versions in the 50s. So there's those different versions of 1984, which could be on this list, which would merit being on this list. In one of the old versions of 1984, we also have Donald Pleasance. So check it out if you can. But, I could have mentioned Gattaca, obviously. I don't like it as much as other people, but it's a great, great, great film. Very smart, interesting. Brazil, obviously. Once again, I don't like it. That's another movie that I never really. It's not for me really, but it's obviously super smart, visually striking. Robert De Niro, I think Michael Palin stars. Oh, Jonathan Pryce. Anyway, I'm due to rewatch it. I haven't rewatched it in ages, but certainly would be worthy of this list. And what's the others? Yeah, Logan's Run. Yeah. So I made a mistake. There are two movies left. So okay. So what is number two then? Well, actually, there are two movies tied. One is Fällan and one is Privilege, and these are the movies of Peter Watkins. Now, if you don't know who Peter Watkins is, he is probably the most subversive director alive today. He hasn't directed a movie in, I think, 20 years. But his specialty is the documentary style movie. But he has a very specific way of using that. Usually he almost always does either historical movies or science fiction movies. But either way, like his first movie was called Culloden, and it's about the war with like Bonnie Prince Philip and a war in Scotland, essentially, like a revolt in Scotland. But the thing is that famous revolt in Scotland. But the thing is that he's shooting these, fights and soldiers, but he has a camera crew there and they're interviewing like the villagers and the officers. And so the idea is that we're in, I don't know what year it was, but we're in like that period. But we still have, cameras and journalists and a TV, like a studio. And he uses that, he almost always, he very frequently does that to show the point of view of characters from different sides. This is something he does very frequently. And he does it to almost like a Brechtian way, like Bertolt Brecht. It has a distancing effect because it shows us, and this is what we'll see in the two movies I mentioned, it shows us once again just how dystopian the world we're used to actually is. So I mentioned Privilege because I love it so much, and for a while it was almost impossible to see a copy. Very famously, when he got some funding to make the movie, but the producers, when they saw it, they were horrified, and they said that no one on earth would ever see the movie because it would, bring forth the collapse of civilization. and so they locked it away, and it came very close to them destroying the copies. For a while, there was a single copy on earth in a safe somewhere. And eventually, it eventually got released on DVD, and I have that DVD. And this Privilege is the story of it's in England, and it's a future fascistic state, but the people are controlled, and especially like young people are controlled by a rock star. So we have this incarnation of youthful and popular revolt, and here he's kind of very sexualized. So here sex is used. Here it's not used to create a revolt. It's used to quell a revolt. So the sexual drive energy is used to maintain the regime, essentially. And when he's not on stage or on TV, the rock star is essentially like a zombie. He's broken inside. He has no personality. And the people in like the church uses him, and the state uses him, but they're afraid they're losing control of their main resource to maintain control of the population. And so they bring a girl to him, and that's where the story goes off in another direction. But he'll start to reawaken his real self, and he starts to want to kind of revolt. And the way the movie deals with that, it's Absolutely, absolutely brilliant, and I think very well observed. And normally I would have put only that movie on the list, but I put two Peter Watkins movie um, side by side, because for number two, because one, because people need to watch more Peter Watkins movies. I mean, if you're interested in these topics, if you like, science fiction and thinking about these topics, and if you're looking for a unique voice and a true auteur, if you like somebody who is not a sellout, who no one could ever imagine of making any compromise at all, Peter Watkins, and his aesthetic is so unique. But I put a second Peter Watkins movie, which is called Fällan, which is The Trap, I think, and because it's hyper obscure. It's a TV movie from Finland or Scandinavia, or I don't know, something like that, and it's. I think you can find a copy. It might be on YouTube, but like a VHS rip, like a cheap VHS rip of the movie. And the copy is terrible, but that movie is so insanely powerful. It's like 1 hour, and essentially it's New Year's Eve, and we have a peace treaty. It's New Year's Eve in a nuclear plant. It's a bunker, and there's nuclear energy involved, and the bunker is protected by soldiers, a lot of soldiers, and there are tons of checkpoints because they're expecting they're afraid there's going to be a terrorist attack. And we're not sure at the beginning why there would be a terrorist attack, because we're watching this family prepare for New Year's Eve. But they're watching television, and there's a camera crew there who's filming them. He's filming New Year's Eve in this bunker for a supposed documentary. And oh no, everything is fine. We're good. We're going to see my in-laws in a few hours. And oh, here they are going through the first checkpoint, and And they're watching the news at the same time, and the news is the newscasters, and they're like, oh, everything is great, everything is fantastic. Isn't this the best day in the entire history of humanity? Because the USA and the USSR are about to sign the peace treaty. Today, they will sign the peace treaty on New Year's Eve. I think it's New Year's Eve 2000. It was shot in the 70s, so it's like the big, the New Year's Eve, 1999 New Year's Eve, yes. Change of the millennium. And but eventually, as the movie progresses, you still have this sense of impending doom in the movie, but you realize why eventually, because as the movie progresses, you come to the realization that this is not, first of all, this is a horrible, like, it's almost end times level of dystopia, what we see in the movie. And the first realization is this, it's like, oh my God, things are horrible, like atrociously, like I'm not saying any details because you have to experience it. But every 10 or 5 or 10 minutes, you're like, oh boy, it's a lot worse than I thought. And it escalates like 1,000-fold every 10 minutes. It's amazing. It's like astounding. But the other thing is that the people on television speak exactly like they do now. And it doesn't matter what channel you watch, or right or left. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing. Yeah. And the people in the interviews with the camera crew, they basically say exactly the same thing that everybody says, like workers in the mine interviewed eventually. Everybody, it's exactly the same as we have. Exactly the same as we had in the 70s, and exactly the same as we have here. And we always have this idea that the other side is worse and we're better. in some way. So the other side being like in the 70s, like the Eastern Bloc, or in modern times, even if staying in the West, there's the right and the left. But yeah, there's an element of the movie that shows the trap there, because there's a level of dystopia which is hidden by this apparent contradiction, which is a big point of the movie with the peace treaty between the US and the USSR. So again, Fällan is like the trap. I mean, the copy is terrible. There's one copy on Earth, that one for real, and it's basically impossible to restore it. It's a cheap VHS rip, but yeah, it's like it's my number 2 for a reason. And I put privilege because I put it so much, and because it's in a way it's a higher budget version of that idea. But Fällan is the most powerful. I mean, it's absolute masterpiece. Cheap looking, video crews, semi-amateur actors, but yeah, completely brilliant. And there's a leftist guy, and anyway, I think there's even a criticism precisely of militantism and the left. I mean, you have to see that if this topic interests you. But yeah, so number 1, I've mentioned my honorable mentions. So number 1, well, I think there's no choice for number 1 dystopian movie. It has to be Blade Runner. But why? Why is Blade Runner so obviously the most evocative? Like, why is it? Because I just said all these things about Fällan, for instance, but I still put it at number 2. And so what do we have in Blade Runner? Well, on the surface, it's dystopia, like there's pollution, obviously. So there's that type of dystopia in the movie, and you might say something about crime, maybe, but certainly, it's the idea that there's pollution and urban sprawl. So there's all that level of, famine and all these things. But, and it's obviously like a beautiful movie. Like in those days, Ridley Scott really had a special touch. He's still very powerful visually, and maybe nobody does better looking visual movies than Ridley Scott even today. But in those days, he also had something really profound, and which is the reason it's the number 1 dystopia. Because so obviously the visuals are top level, otherworldly, masterpiece level. It's like a moving Rembrandt painting. It's brilliant in so many ways. The production design, I think Anton Furst, I'm not sure, but I think it's the same guy who did the City and the '89 Batman, but don't quote me on that. But yeah, obviously, the costumes and the flying car and the city with all those people with, the strange costumes and the lights and the Coca-Cola commercial with the Japanese lady and all these things, like the buildings and the huge flame that exudes from this building periodically. Like all these things are masterpiece level, and we have brilliant actors, obviously, Harrison Ford, Rutger Hauer, the whole cast, Edward James Olmos, legendary turn in this movie, the music, all these things. Like, we all know why Blade Runner is awesome. But what makes this the number 1 dystopia is that it's about humanity. It's about, and this is where, like, usually when we talked about the movie, for many years, the question was, is Deckard a replicant? So the point isn't that Deckard is a replicant. The point is that Batty, the Rutger Hauer character, even though he's a replicant, is more human than the other humans. You see? Because he saves Harrison Ford at the end. So yes, the replicants they look frightened. They are frightening. They behave frighteningly. They kill people all the time, and for a long part of the movie, we're afraid of them. Certainly of the violence that they can do. And this is another movie where the violence is very graphic and extreme, even today. But why are they doing this? They're doing this because they've been programmed to live for 4 years, yes, and then they automatically die. And they are built by men, and they're essentially kind of machines. But we see the labs where they're grown or built, like the I think James Wong, the Chinese guy who builds the eyes. Well, he's growing the eyes. Yes, there are some machine parts somewhere maybe, but say the logo, the slogan of the Tyrell Corporation is more human than human, and that's the entire point of the movie. The replicants are behaving like violently because they are super powerful 4-year-olds, and they have the emotions of 4-year-olds basically. Yeah? And they love each other and they want to live, and they are slaves. You know? The replicants are slave labor. That is what they are. Like one of them is a prostitute, you know, a slavery built for that. I mean, that's the Daryl Hannah character. And, you know, the other guys are workers, you know. And so they like, no, we are alive and we need to live. We want to live. If there is a way to live, we will find it. And they have loyalty and they have love. And one by one, you know, Deckard kills them. And there's one of the famous instances where he shoots one of them, like the girl. He shoots a woman in the back. Mm-hmm. And he feels it. I don't know, in the voiceover version, maybe the one with the voiceover, maybe he mentions it. But what is the narrative arc of Deckard? He's realizing that he has no humanity. He has, even if he is human, he's less human than the replicants. Whatever humanity he had, he's lost to his job and his entire life. And essentially, he's representing humanity in this dystopia. Like the effect of the dystopian times and way of life, which is our way of life, slightly exaggerated, on the experience of being human, and the fact that he's lost his humanity. And when Batty saves him, and he dies, and he was about to kill him, yes, and so why does he save him ultimately? Well, we're never quite sure, but we don't know why he seemed to be about to kill him and then decides to save him. But we do know why he saves him. He saves him out of humanity, out of a shared sense. It's more than empathy, because in empathy there's still a kind of separation. It's the feeling of togetherness, but there's still me and the other. But when Batty saves Deckard, the point is that, yes, I have seen things you will never know, you can't imagine, but there is a sense where I just need somebody to share with, and what he wants to share, well, what he wants to share is humanity. You know, and that sharing that is the humanity. Like, there's humanity as I have this body, there's this level on the factual level, but we need to be more human. We need to show humanity. When we say that, it's a sense of shared, like, collectiveness, you know, the shared, like, beingness, you know. So, and that's, you know, essentially when, so the idea is, yeah, okay, he's a replicant, okay, at the end, and he's on the run with the girl. But why is he running with the girl? Because there's no way he's going to continue killing replicants. He loves the girl, who is a replicant. Huh? But, and the punch is, okay, so we interpret the ending as, okay, so the punch is he's a replicant, he's a robot, so it was that all along. But it's not that. The point is that the metaphor of the replicant is humans, it's it's the metaphor of the dehumanized human remembering his humanity. And that's why he becomes a replicant, because he remembers now that he's human. And he's on the run because this entire society is built on dehumanizing the experience itself of being human. And that's what it runs on. And that's the real essence of dystopia. And, you know, is that not why maybe it feels so much these days like we're living in dystopian times? But in this sense, you know, Maria is right. I mean, we do have a heart, and why don't we use it? Yeah, so that's it. Those were my 7 dystopian movies. And let us not only celebrate these movies, but let us celebrate our shared humanity. And life is good. Keep watching the sky.